Welcome to the Circular Economy Show podcast. We're back for another week with conversations with experts and practitioners on the topic of the circular economy. I'm Seb, your host, and today my co-host is Pippa Shawley. Welcome, Pippa.
Hi, Seb. Nice to be here.
What are we going to be hearing about in today's episode?
So today we're talking about chemistry, which you have assured me is not a specialist subject. So we're looking at sort of the materials that are part of the circular economy, right?
I mean, when I assured you that, Pippa, the only thing I can tell you is that I feel like if I can understand this, then you can certainly understand this, and probably most of the people listening to this podcast can understand it.
Fantastic. So who are we going to hear from today?
So this conversation, we actually recorded this conversation in the summer of 2021. It featured, or a shorter version of it featured as part of the Foundation Summit. It's with Alysia Garmulewicz, who in many ways is a leading thinker, not only on the circular economy, but on materials science, as you put it. She co-founded an institution called Materiom, which looks at the kind of future of materials. And she's an academic in that space. A truly excellent explainer and storyteller of the potential and possibility of a material palette that's fit for the long term and for a circular economy.
Amazing. We're also going to hear something about kind of the potential of AI and how that can assist as well, and how to scale that biomaterial, which is, I think, where there's a lot of potential for revolutionizing the system, right?
So Alysia makes that connection between technology and our new kind of data capabilities and some of the materials that she's interested in. And I think on scale, she's one of my favorite people to speak to on scale. And indeed, I'm in conversation with her in this conversation, because one of the things she says that has always stuck with me, and I think if anyone listens to me regularly, they may have heard me use this example before, but that often we say there's too much plastic, for instance, in the world. She makes the point that actually there's there's 1,000 times more chitin, which is a kind of natural occurring material in the economy. And her point there is to say that actually scale isn't necessarily the problem with our material palette today. It's fitness in society and in the environment.
So it's looking at what is the right material to use for the different case studies.
Exactly.
Should we have a listen?
I think so.
Let's go.
Okay, Alysia, thank you so much for joining us and making time to have this conversation. You're founder of an organisation called Materiom. Can you tell me, what does Materiom do?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. So Materiom is an open data commons, specifically to provide data on material processes and properties. And those materials are made from abundant sources of natural biomass. So that's primarily what we're all about, is providing that open data layer to accelerate material commercialization for SMEs, for entrepreneurs, to better get them to market faster and lower those barriers to entry. The other aspects of what we do are we're developing an autonomous platform together with our partner Super Labs, and that will be an AI-driven materials optimization engine. So basically, we're providing a service where people can actually optimize materials towards a certain product niche through experimentation, and that will all be enhanced by artificial intelligence modeling. And then the last piece of the puzzle, which we're really focused on, is when you imagine those materials being commercialized, it's super important to be able to understand how you can source biomass in a regenerative way so that we don't over-extract any given source ecosystem. And so we're developing knowledge and tools for biomass sourcing to encourage and help those regenerative supply chains to start to develop.
In some ways, materials are kind of an unthought about part of our economy in a weird way. Like, obviously, I'm interacting with a whole host of materials right now, and all of us are in our daily lives. Is some of the impetus behind Materiom that fact that actually the world of materials is slightly unexplored?
I think that's true, and it's something that we've lost touch with in terms of being really having a deep knowledge and understanding about the material world that we inhabit and consume in every day. And that's a large impetus and motivation behind Materiom is to open up access to that knowledge, and specifically through the lens of biomaterials, bioplastics, biocomposites. These are actually with kind of with chemistry methods that are very accessible, we use life-friendly chemistry methods. This actually enables people to participate in ways that previously is really out of the realm of possibility for people. So unless you're a polymer chemist or a material scientist, you never really get in touch with material development, where we're trying to open that up to more people in more places. And we think that will actually drive innovation as well, commercial innovation.
And there's a focus on biomaterials. What is it that's exciting about the idea of biomaterials? I guess you tapped into it a little bit just now, but why the focus on biomaterials?
Yes, well, the potential of biomaterials is massive when you look actually at just the volume of biopolymers that are in flow in the global biosphere that compose and make up the incredible material production that the natural world is made out of. And so, for instance, you can look at the biopolymer chitin, which is it composes the exoskeletons of insects, the crustacean shells, as well as the cell walls of fungi. It's an incredible biopolymer that's so abundant. It's about 100 billion tons in flow in the biosphere annually. And that's actually the amount of chitin produced in 1 year is equivalent to greater than 300 years of the current worldwide plastics production. So it just shows the kind of scale of materials that we could actually be building with and developing. And that's not even mentioning cellulose. So cellulose is 2 teratons per year, which is orders of magnitude higher. And so that why I mention that is that you have to put our production of petrochemical plastics in context, and that is minuscule. We're producing about over 300 million tons per year of petrochemical plastics, which is incredibly problematic when they bioaccumulate. And are in our drinking water and causing problems for other organisms. But it shows that it's not necessarily the material world that we're part of. It's what that's composed of, what the actual building blocks we're using. And so substituting those building blocks, I think, will have an enormous potential for us to build habitat products, et cetera, that are fundamentally regenerative. So this is not to say that biomaterials need to compose everything in our economy, but where the real opportunity lies is in fast-moving consumer goods, where you've got high volume and the throughput is really fast. And you need to, therefore, grapple with the fact that there's going to be leakage. It's incredibly difficult to design that out. And so that's where it's really important to look at using bio-based building blocks that are effective after end of life, no matter where they go. So you can have small amounts of leakage, depending on the quantity and volume, that are regenerative and not necessarily detrimental. And that's where I think the biomaterial economy is specifically suited to that sector. The other aspect as well is that we're looking at is that biomaterials can be actually quite high performance and can take on product niches that currently technical materials occupy. And so that's something that is very much a research frontier that we want to be part of. For instance, the properties of spider silk are incredible, pound for pound stronger than steel, for instance. And that kind of engineering of materials is very much in development right now. And it's very exciting to push the boundaries of how far we can use these biopolymer building blocks that are super abundant, but then push their performance by mimicking the way that the natural world works. In terms of composing materials, not with toxic chemicals and high heat and pressure, but rather with structure at micro and nanoscales.
I really like it when you give that fact about chitin, Alysia, because I quote that quite often. So whenever I hear you say it, I sort of I'm getting it right. And I think what it illustrates really powerfully is this notion that very often our response to the challenges we see is to do less, is to have less. And that example and the point about being inspired by natural systems emphasizes the fact that we can have abundance if the building blocks are right, if the principles are right, if the design is right. And I guess we're getting into it already, but it's worthwhile making maybe the connection a bit more explicit. In your view, how does this kind of materials innovation space contribute to a circular economy?
So the importance of of regenerative materials for the circular economy is really, it's the starting point for everything when you think about product life cycles. And so if you get materials right in terms of making sure that the building blocks and that the way they're composed and fit together, make sure that they can go back into natural systems as productive nutrients after end of life, that means that that entire product can be thought of as regenerative. Now, there's lots of steps along the way, but it's really, really important to get that foundation right. So I see Materiom and what we're doing and providing that layer of information as providing that kind of that paint box, that palette for what you want to compose for products in circulation everywhere. And as soon as we get the materials right and the chemistry right, we're well along the way to make sure that any product we make goes back into a cycle in a way that's not just zero impact, but actually has a positive impact on any source ecosystem that's actually supporting our productive economy.
What's your view on how this scales? I mean, it's quite easy to get excited about this area, and actually if anyone has been watching, their eyes have been open to the world of biomaterials, they might be quite excited. Because we know so little about how our current materials have come into use, I guess it's not something that we naturally understand, and there must be some barriers to that as well. So how do we get the sort of research level materials you're looking at now to a place where they're as abundant as some of the materials that we're very familiar with as today?
It really requires changing our lens on what scale means. So in today's world, we're very familiar with the concept of scale being associated with centralized mass manufacturing. So we produce a lot of things in one location and then export it globally. And that's something that doesn't work with a biomaterial economy and biomaterial supply chains because there's a lot of secondary and third generation biomass that is highly distributed. So think of food waste, for instance, or agricultural byproducts. That's something that's very difficult to centralize and produce from. And you actually risk over extracting any given source ecosystem if you try and scale up in any one location in a traditional mass manufacturing sense. The thing that we need to think about is scaling horizontally. So actually, we want to scale by propagating these solutions at local and regional scales. So if you imagine, again, being nature inspired, we're talking about cycling nutrients, cycling materials at local and regional scales where the intelligence, the knowledge, the understanding of what's available, and therefore the rate of nutrient return that's necessary to keep the system regenerative, that's built in to the system. And so we see Materiom and the kind of the sea change we want to inspire as being the information layer that allows people everywhere at small and medium scales to be able to adopt new materials, commercialize them, and enter into the market. Now, that's not to say that large companies are somehow not part of that potential vision. It's just that we have to rethink the ways supply chains operate. So you may have global brands, but the way in which they're sourcing nutrients may actually be more regionalized. And the great thing about working with the palette of building blocks that we talk about, so the biopolymers like chitin and cellulose and starch, and seaweed biopolymers, for instance, all of these amazing building blocks, they actually are repeated across biomes everywhere. And so even though you may be sourcing from slightly different sources of biomass, depending on location, the building blocks themselves are quite sourceable everywhere. And so it's something where we can share knowledge across biomes, and we can share knowledge across these more regionalized supply chains. So the knowledge is digital, but the materials cycle at local and regional levels.
And what's really interesting about that story is in many ways what could be viewed as a material story is really a system story. Like the material innovation is a lens into redesigning the system. They're the building blocks of the system. But you're beginning to talk about, the supply chains, the scale, how it works, toggling between that global and local view. And I guess to that end, my final question would be, are there any risks to this kind of innovation, or at least that kind of drive to get other people involved in this kind of innovation? Do we need to be thoughtful about what we kind of celebrate in this materials innovation space?
Well, certainly in the biomaterial space, it's very, very important to look for distributed, abundant sources of biomass that don't over-extract any source ecosystem or compete with arable land for food. So there's a lot of bioplastics on the market now that are for first-generation biomass, which is, for instance, corn or soy crops. And that is very problematic from a systems perspective for competition for land for food, as well as irrigation pressures, etc. And so we're looking at specifically coupling the development of novel supply chains to secondary and tertiary sources of biomass, where you're actually sourcing from waste from the food supply chain, as well as looking at growing new farming methods that are regenerative. So this goes into both agricultural practices, regenerative agriculture, as well as, for instance, seaweed farming that can actually be a net positive on sequestering carbon. And if done with multi-trophic aquaculture, basically integrating different species so that nutrients flow in closed loops, that can actually, you can extract biomolecules from seaweed, for instance, for making materials in a way that's actually the whole system is being more productive because you're developing materials in that location. That kind of lens is necessary. If we just go with, we just want to source biomass without understanding the system's implications, there are risks of over-extracting and undermining biodiversity and the ecosystem services that support us all. So there's also an element of mindset shift that has to take place when it comes to knowledge about materials. And right now, we have a very closed view of material knowledge. And that's something that, in order to create a massive shift in the market, I believe we have to open up our understanding and concrete knowledge about material formulations and their properties to in an open source fashion. And that open source has been shown in software as well as hardware to accelerate innovation. And if we do that in the materials field, we can get people collaborating from all over the world to accelerate and optimize materials for the market a lot faster. And that doesn't mean that eventually there might be in the value chain clear ways that IP is appropriate to then protect a certain material that's in concert with the production technology, et cetera, and then is commercialized. That's great. But the underlying layer, the fundamental understanding of how to make materials and their resulting properties in this biomaterial space, if that is made open source at a certain level, it will accelerate R&D for many players. And that's really fundamental to market transformation.
So, Alysia, it's good to hear about the ideas, but where are some of the bright spots emerging? Is this actually happening already today?
Yes, so the good news is there's a huge amount of not only knowledge being produced in the research community, that Materiom, what we're doing is aggregating that. So it's very disaggregated at the moment, but there's an incredible bank of knowledge out there in how to make materials with this nature-inspired palette and life-friendly chemistry. What we're going to do is aggregate that and provide that as a resource that is easily navigable. The other aspect of really exciting work that's going on is actually taking these recipes and commercializing them. And you see popping up more and more companies that are providing a radically different material offering. So these are not bioplastics that have kind of in the fine print something regarding, okay, they're not biodegradable, or they actually have just a small amount of bio in them. These are the kind of opaque nature of bioplastics in today's market. What you're seeing are companies that are offering a really radical option. Like they're providing materials that are truly regenerative and use life-friendly chemistry, and that use bio-based building blocks from right in the localities and regions that they're actually located in. So, for instance, Notpla, you've got Biome, you've got Marinatex. These are companies that are in the UK, Ecovative. These are companies that just in the UK you can see, and then around the world, they're just popping up increasingly. And companies are also offering really, really important materials that are actually better than the current market alternatives. So Kuhn Tech is looking at biodegradable packaging that is really impressive from a performance perspective. And others are similarly playing with how can materials that are made from bio-based building blocks actually outperform commercial materials that currently hold sway in the market.
That was a really interesting conversation to hear, Seb. I think particularly about that kind of mindset shift of the ownership of knowledge and kind of how it's beyond this one group.
Yeah, I mean, Alysia's really taps into a whole range of themes. Like, how do we have regenerative materials? How do we empower and enable that with the latest technological capabilities? And then there's this thread around how important open source is. And there's two things about that. One is that they are open sourcing their knowledge. They're making it possible for people to recreate what they've created locally in their own context. And it's also a great stimulus for innovation, like recognizing that a lot more innovation needs to happen in this sphere. And therefore, actually, it's within their interest in terms of their mission to open source what they're doing so that others can kind of build on it and develop it further and make the innovation happen faster.
I think it's so exciting kind of looking at the circular economy and how much potential and sort of creativity and innovation is happening at every level, from kind of the materials we're using to how people are actually using them as consumers. We've got lots more kind of inspiration and examples on our website, haven't we?
Exactly, yeah. So you can find those in the various topic pages, whether you're looking at the upstream innovation space under plastics or in the case studies section. And Alicia's a great source for examples, and she's a great source for some of the theories, principles, direction that might drive how we critique examples. And obviously, it's worth saying, I think we picked up into the conversation a little bit, but she's talking about the world of biomaterials, which is quite a complex and confusing world in terms of what this terminology means. So I definitely recommend her work and the work of Materiom as a really good place to get educated on that and build up your knowledge about that and some of its potential.
And I think she's very good at articulating that in a way that we can all understand, because, as you say, we don't all have PhDs in material science.
I mean, Pippa, when you say I don't have a PhD in science, like I might have equivalent level knowledge, especially after the amount of time I've spent talking to Alysia.
Well, that's good. Good use of your time.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. It's brought to you by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where we develop and promote the idea of a circular economy, engage key stakeholders to make it happen, and try and mobilise system solution at scale. Now, Pippa, there's one favour that I know you want to ask of the audience.
Well, I would absolutely love it if you enjoyed this episode to share it with people that you think might also be interested, whether that's your colleagues or your friends or fellow students. We've got loads and loads of episodes in our back catalogue, and we've got way more to come. So please like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this.
And we'll be back next week.
See you then.